Have you ever seen a situation where a person was pushed way too far and they did something terrible? They obviously shouldn't have done it, but you can kind of, sort of understand why they did it? Well, that's what today's story is all about. Philip was a highly nervous, slender, puny looking Puerto Rican teenager. He lived in a destructive social and psychological circumstances. All his life, Philip worried and fretted, which stemmed from his home and school situation. Philip was born in Puerto Rico, but life was very tough there because his father, a factory hand, barely earned enough money to take care of his family. So his father moved to New York City, in the land of opportunity, and took his son with him. 3 months later, his mother and sister joined them. However, it was at this point his parents' relationship deteriorated badly. His father was a heavy drinker, and Philip frequently saw his father physically abusing his mother. So, in December 1950, she left her husband, so it was just her and her 2 children. She had to go on welfare to take care of them. Now, when Philip lived in Puerto Rico, he never actually went to school, so when he arrived in New York City at the age of 8.5, that is actually when he started school. And I could just imagine how tough this was for him, especially with the language barrier. Philip and his sister hated school, and they were constant truants. They loathed authority, almost to the point of irrationality. Philip said he hated school so much because the bigger boys were always picking on him. When Philip was 13 years old, he and his sister were put on probation in Bronx Children's Court. Even after probation, his school situation didn't improve. He was a non-reader, and his teachers said he was sullen, morose, and antisocial. Philip wasn't just picked on by the bigger boys, but he had many physical illnesses, and that's what made absent from school. Dizziness, chest pains, earaches, headaches. They did an extensive medical checkup to see what was going on, but they found no organic basis for it. And I wonder if the stress of life was what was actually making him feel sick. And I think there's something to this, because the New York City Board of Education became interested in Philip, and they did a psychological test, a psychiatric test, and they evaluated his social history. And they found out that Philip was a hypochondriac, and he suffered from acute anxiety. In one test by a psychiatrist in Children's Court in May 1953, Philip was diagnosed as an adjustment reaction of childhood with a conduct disturbance in an emotionally disturbed and socially and educationally limited boy. That's quite the mouthful. They didn't feel he was psychotic, although he was already showing some paranoid trends in the way he thought. Even Philip, if you asked him, described himself as a nervous person. Philip's home life was absolutely terrible. His mother was 53 years old, and she herself was raised under deprived circumstances. She had no schooling and got married for the first time when she was 20 years old. She and her husband had 2 children, but 3 years after they got married, he died of tuberculosis in Puerto Rico. Now a widow with 2 children, she married Eusebio, I hope I said that right, and had 2 more children. One of them was Philip. She couldn't have picked a worse man. He was a heavy drinker, abusive, and totally unconcerned with the responsibilities of raising his family. To make things worse, Philip's mother was a sickly woman who became blind in the early 1950s and was unable to cope with the problems of raising her children, and not just that, but adjusting to the culture of New York City. Philip gave companionship and emotional support to his mother, and he developed an almost pathological attachment to his mom. And he had a high degree of fear that agencies would break up the home. Now, obviously, because of her blindness, Philip's mother couldn't supervise and guide the children as they needed, and the roles actually were reversed. Even when Philip was quite young, she became quite dependent on her children before they were ready to take on such a massive undertaking. Philip's mother completely depended on him for maintenance of the home. Philip, his sister, and mother lived on the ground floor of a rooming house at 337 East 135th Street in the Bronx. It was poorly furnished and quite run down. Philip actually slept in the same bed as his mother until he was 14 years old. His sister, who was unstable and immature herself, dominated and led the family, forced to because, obviously, her mother's blindness. Philip was totally preoccupied with the bad home situation, and he had fantasies that his parents would get back together, which they never did. And now you can see where Philip was at in life. This brings us to the early morning hours of August 24, 1957, 1:30 in the morning to be exact. Philip and two other Puerto Ricans were walking in the vicinity of East 136th Street and Alexander Avenue in the Bronx when they passed by a group of 6 white youths. One of those youths was Peter DiMaggio. He was dressed in civilian clothes at the time, although he was on leave from the U.S. Navy. You see, he was visiting his old pals in the neighborhood where he had lived before going into the Navy, and he and his friends just wanted to celebrate, and they just consumed several glasses of beer together at a nearby bar. As Philip and his two friends walked by the group of 6, they were talking to each other in Spanish. Philip claimed that one of the 6, who was nicknamed Red, mockingly called him an obscene name in Spanish. However, Red claimed that it was Philip who, unprovoked, deliberately called him an obscene Spanish epithet. In any event, Philip exchanged angry words with the crowd of 6 youths, and the argument that ensued was mainly between him and Red. Now, Peter DiMaggio, he was not directly involved in the argument, as he was just a casual bystander on the edge of the crowd, watching what was going on. After a few minutes of arguing, Philip left very angry, and he warned the 6 youths in broken English that he would be back to settle the argument. And Philip meant it. He ran to his nearby home at 337 East 135th Street, where he had concealed under his bed a cardboard box with a .22 caliber Remington rifle loaded with 3 bullets. Philip took the rifle in the cardboard box, and within about 5 minutes he returned to the scene of the argument he just had with Red and his friends. Philip went to a stoop in front of 179 Alexander Avenue, which is about 150 feet away from where the 6 youths were still standing. Philip fired 2 shots into the air, which attracted the attention of Peter DiMaggio and his friends. Philip then walked into the middle of the street, closer to the group of 6. Peter DiMaggio saw Philip carrying the cardboard box, and he yelled to his friends, "Watch out, he's got something in there." Peter approached Philip, and he came within 4 feet of Philip with the intention of disarming him. All of a sudden, Philip fired 1 more bullet from the rifle, which struck Peter in the right side of his abdomen. Philip dropped the rifle and ran away to his sister's house, which wasn't too far away. Peter's friends hailed a passing motorist, and they took Peter to Lincoln Hospital, where he was found to be in critical condition. The police were notified about the shooting, and 3 hours later, Patrolman Richard Curran of the Bronx Youth Squad arrested Philip at his sister's home. The patrolman actually knew Philip because he had arrested him the previous month along with 11 others when they were assembled at East 135th Street and Lincoln Avenue in the Bronx for the purposes of a gang fight. Now, one of those arrested was armed with a chain, while another had a knife. Unfortunately, the gang name that Philip belonged to wasn't noted in the records. The background of the shooting came out of the social tensions that were present in the South Bronx area at the time. There was a tremendous influx of Puerto Ricans in the years leading up to 1957 who moved into the neighborhood that was, until a few years before that, occupied mostly by Irish, Italian, and other groups. Peter DiMaggio and his friends were known to be members of a gang called the Mick Wops. Now, I'm not sure if that was what they called themselves or if the Puerto Ricans called them that. Anyhow, this gang had a lot of hostility to the Puerto Rican newcomers in the neighborhood. They said that Philip was the one who started the quarrel, but Philip said that they started it. The investigator said it appeared quite likely that the 6 members of the Mick Wops, who had just been drinking beer together, probably started the quarrel with Philip and his 2 friends, who just happened to be passing by them. Now, as for Peter and his injuries, he was badly hurt and in critical condition for several days after he entered the Lincoln Hospital. He had surgery to remove the bullet, and he received several blood transfusions. He was in Lincoln Hospital for 7 days, and then he was removed to the St. Albans Navy Hospital, where he remained for 23 more days before he was finally discharged. He eventually recovered completely from his injury, and all his medical expenses were taken care of by the U.S. Navy. The investigator asked Philip for his explanation of the shooting incident, and so now we get to hear it from Philip's point of view. First of all, Phillip frankly admitted that he shot Peter DiMaggio. He said that earlier on the night of the shooting, he was visiting a pal who lived on East 135th Street, where he was watching television. After he left his friend's house, he was met by two other Puerto Ricans, and as the three of them walked by East 135th Street and Lincoln Avenue, that's when they noticed the crowd of 6 Mick-wops, including Peter DiMaggio. Phillip said that Peter and his friends were drunk, and as they passed by them, Red called Phillip an obscene Spanish name. Now, Phillip admitted that he responded with some of his own Spanish curses, and that Red and his friends got very angry about this and aggressively pushed him against the wall and began to badger him. Phillip said he became extremely angry and he fled from the scene. He wanted revenge. So he returned home, where he had hidden the .22 caliber rifle under his bed, which I had mentioned before. Now, he said that he found the rifle in a garbage can several months earlier. Now, this is a rather dubious explanation, and I don't buy it for one bit. Now, after he found the rifle, he obtained 3 .22 caliber bullets from a Coney Island shooting gallery, and together with the rifle, hid them under his bed. When Phillip was questioned why he needed a rifle in the first place, he said he merely found the weapon and decided to keep it. He said that when he returned to the scene of the argument with the rifle, he deliberately fired 2 shots into the air, and his intention was merely to frighten the 6 white youths. And he denied that he intended to shoot anyone, but when DiMaggio approached him and tried to disarm him, he changed his mind, so he shot him. Now, Phillip said that he did not know Peter or any of his friends prior to the shooting, but he insisted that many white kids in that neighborhood frequently abused him, insulted him, jostled him, and spit at him without provocation on his part. Now, that was Peter's outlook. As far as how the investigator looked at the situation, he felt that Peter and his friends were the ones to throw the insults first, and that their story did not really have the ring of truth. Now, he said that Phillip was an unstable, hot-headed, vengeful individual who decided to take matters into his own hands. It was also the opinion of the investigator that Phillip's paranoid thinking was directly related to him shooting Peter. He also said that obviously Phillip's shooting was certainly not to be condoned, but it also appeared quite obvious to him that Peter was an extremely unfortunate individual who probably had more sin against him than he was a sinner. So what happened to Phillip? Well, he was found guilty and he was sentenced to an upstate reformatory for 3 years. And the concern was that he wouldn't really have anywhere to go back to when he got out on parole. But his sister and his mother both vowed to help him as best as they could, although you kind of wonder how much help they could really be with his mother's condition. Well, that's all I know about Phillip, other than the fact he did get out, and I do believe he moved in with his sister. So I really hope that Phillip made it and that he did well. And thank you very much for watching this video. I appreciate your time, and I hope you have a great day.